When you think about it, how did the early Christian church go from this tiny group of followers to a massive global movement? It's pretty amazing. Well, that kind of explosive growth wasn't just random. It was ignited and really fueled by a very specific, consistent, and incredibly powerful message. So, what was this message? It wasn't just some vague spiritual idea or, a new set of moral rules. Nope. It was a clear, bold declaration that had the power to change absolutely everything. To really understand that message, we need to dig into what scholars call the charismatic core. Sounds a bit technical, I know, but this was the non-negotiable heart of everything the apostles taught, their essential proclamation to the world. Okay, so that word charisma, it's crucial. It's not just a fancy term. It's the real key here. It refers to the specific announcement about Jesus Christ. This was absolutely not some loose philosophy. It was a precise and consistent declaration about who he was and what he did. And this charisma, it really breaks down into three essential parts, super memorable. First, his identity, that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah, the one the prophets had been talking about for centuries. Second, his redemptive work, that he was the crucified Savior whose death paid for our sin. And third, his exaltation, that he is the resurrected Lord, right now reigning over all creation. His identity, his work, his exaltation. That was the indispensable message. And notice how the apostles presented their case. They didn't just state these claims. They were meticulous. They pointed to Jesus as a man attested to you by God with miracles, just like Peter said in Acts chapter 2. They systematically connected him to Old Testament prophecy, showing he was the promised descendant of David, and that his resurrection and even his exaltation were predicted hundreds of years earlier in the Psalms. It was a really solid evidence-based argument. And this uncompromising nature of his redemptive work, wow, it just comes through so powerfully in this verse from Acts. There is salvation in no one else. For the apostles, the work of Jesus wasn't just one of many options. It was the one, sufficient, and necessary path to forgiveness and a whole new life. So this message, it wasn't just a set of abstract ideas. It had this inherent transformative power. Let's actually look at how this charisma changed real people's lives. The impact was immediate and just staggering. On one single day, the day of Pentecost, right after Peter preached this message for the very first time, the sources say 3,000 people responded. 3,000! They were pierced to the heart and immediately repented and got baptized. That just goes to show you the sheer power of a clear, spirit-filled message. And this transformative power wasn't limited to just one group of people. The message hit home with a massive crowd in Jerusalem, sure, but also with a high-ranking Ethiopian official on a random desert road. It changed the life of a wealthy businesswoman, Lydia, and a tough Roman jailer and his family, and it even convinced some of those skeptical Greek philosophers in Athens. It just crossed every social, cultural, and economic line you can imagine. But of course, a message this specific and this powerful, it's going to face challenges. And that opened up a whole new chapter in the story, one about purity, persecution, and the fight to defend the integrity of this indispensable message. And these threats, they basically came from two main directions. Internally, you had the danger of people trying to distort the message. Watering it down or adding a bunch of extra rules. That's what the whole controversy about Gentile converts was about. And then externally, you had intense, violent persecution from the authorities. The Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 is the perfect example of dealing with those internal threats. The challenge was a huge question. Did non-Jewish converts have to follow the law of Moses to be saved? The resolution, after a lot of debate, was crystal clear. No. Salvation is by grace through faith alone. And the impact of that decision, we really can't overstate it. It preserved the purity of the gospel, making sure it stayed a universal message of grace for the whole world. And what about those external threats? Well, their resolve was just unbreakable. After being arrested, flogged, and ordered to shut up, Acts tells us they never ceased teaching and proclaiming Jesus as the Christ. The fact that they were willing to suffer for this message just showed how convinced they were. They knew they were stewards of a divine truth, not just some human opinion. So this all leads us to a final, really important question. Why does this specific message endure? What's the secret sauce behind the unchanging core of what is now a global faith? Well, it seems like there are a few key reasons. First, it gives us a fixed point of truth in a world that's always changing. Second, It's rooted in what God actually did in history through Christ. It's not based on shifting human ideas. Third, its integrity was basically forged in fire, defended from both distortion inside and persecution outside. And finally, this charismatic core, it's the very thing that ties the entire New Testament together and makes it all make sense. And this leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Today, we live in an age of infinite information, right? Endless streams of content, countless competing stories. So, in a world like ours, what is it that gives a single specific message like this one such lasting and transformative power?